December 15th, 1980, Cobo Hall, Detroit. The spotlight hit Marvin Gaye as he walked toward the center of the stage. But something was wrong with his steps. They were too careful, too measured, like a man walking on ice. Aretha Franklin stood at the piano, her fingers already finding the opening chords to "You're All I Need to Get By," waiting for Marvin to find his place beside her. But when he opened his mouth to sing, what came out wasn't the smooth baritone that had made him famous. It was something else, something broken. The audience of Detroit's elite, music executives, politicians, and celebrities gathered for a private charity event, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the Marvin they expected. This wasn't the Prince of Soul who had given them "What's Going On" and Sexual Healing. This was someone else entirely, standing in Marvin's clothes, trying to remember Marvin's songs. Aretha kept playing, her eyes fixed on the keys, but her shoulders had tensed. She had agreed to this duet as a favor, a tribute to their shared Detroit roots and Motown heritage. She had expected professionalism. She had expected respect. What she was witnessing instead would haunt her for years to come, and it would be the last time she ever shared a stage with Marvin Gaye. The months leading up to that December evening had been particularly brutal for Marvin. The success of Sexual Healing 2 years earlier should have been a triumph, a comeback that proved he still had relevance in an industry that was rapidly changing around him. But success had brought its own problems. More money meant more cocaine. More attention meant more pressure to maintain an image that felt increasingly impossible to sustain. The irony wasn't lost on him that a song called Sexual Healing had been recorded during one of the darkest periods of his life. While the world celebrated his return to form, Marvin knew that the song represented everything he couldn't access: genuine connection, authentic intimacy, real healing. The title had become a cruel joke, a reminder of what he needed but couldn't find. His daily routine had collapsed into a predictable cycle of self-destruction. He would wake up in the afternoon, already craving the numbness that cocaine provided. By evening, he would be deep into a binge that would last until dawn, smoking freebase in his childhood bedroom while his father slept down the hall. The proximity to Marvin Sr. added another layer of psychological torture to an already unbearable situation. Marvin had moved back into his childhood home on Gramercy Place, living under the same roof as his father, Marvin Gaye Sr. The house carried the weight of every beating, every cruel word, every moment of terror that had shaped Marvin's understanding of love and power. Being back in that environment, surrounded by memories he had spent decades trying to escape, had sent him spiraling deeper into the chemicals that promised temporary relief but delivered only deeper despair. The cocaine use had escalated beyond recreational or even habitual. It had become medicinal in Marvin's mind, the only thing that could quiet the voices telling him he was a fraud, a failure, a man who had built his career on lies. He would smoke freebase cocaine for hours, staying awake for days, convinced that sleep would bring dreams he couldn't survive. The drug made him paranoid, suspicious of everyone around him, including the few people who still cared enough to worry about his welfare. When the invitation came to perform at the Cobo Hall benefit, Marvin had initially declined. He was aware enough of his condition to know that public appearances were becoming increasingly risky, but the organizers were persistent, and they offered something Marvin couldn't refuse: the chance to sing with Aretha Franklin, the Queen of Soul, an artist whose talent and integrity he had always admired from a distance. Aretha represented something that Marvin felt he had lost: authenticity. While he had spent his career navigating the commercial pressures of Motown, carefully crafting his image to appeal to white audiences while maintaining credibility with black listeners, Aretha had always seemed to sing from a place of uncompromising truth. She was respected by her peers in ways that Marvin no longer felt he deserved. The opportunity to share the stage with her felt like a chance at redemption, a moment where he could prove to himself and others that he was still worthy of standing next to greatness. But as the date approached, Marvin's anxiety intensified. What if he couldn't deliver? What if his voice cracked? What if people saw through the facade and realized how empty he felt inside? The night of the performance, Marvin arrived at Cobo Hall 3 hours late. The organizers had been calling his house repeatedly, and when he finally answered, His speech was slurred and difficult to understand. He insisted he was fine, just tired from rehearsals, but those closest to him knew better. The rehearsals he mentioned had never happened. Marvin had spent the previous week locked in his bedroom, alternating between cocaine binges in periods of catatonic depression. When he finally showed up at the venue, Marvin's appearance shocked everyone who saw him. He had lost significant weight, his skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and his hands shook visibly. His eyes were bloodshot and unfocused, darting around the room as if searching for threats that only he could see. He wore sunglasses indoors, claiming the lights were too bright, but the real reason was that he didn't want anyone to see the emptiness behind his eyes. Aretha had been waiting patiently, warming up with her band, going over the arrangements they had planned to perform together. When Marvin finally appeared backstage, she greeted him with the professionalism that had defined her career, but those who witnessed the interaction noticed her subtle recoil when she saw his condition. She didn't comment, didn't ask questions, didn't express concern. She simply nodded and said, "We should run through the songs once before we go on." The backstage area at Cobo Hall felt suffocating that night. Musicians, technicians, and event organizers moved around with the nervous energy that comes from knowing something is wrong, but not knowing how to address it. Marvin sat alone in a corner, occasionally muttering to himself, his fingers tapping erratic rhythms against his leg. Several people approached him with offers of food, water, or conversation, but he waved them away with increasing agitation. Aretha, meanwhile, went through her pre-performance ritual with the mechanical precision of someone who had done this thousands of times. But even she seemed affected by the tension in the room. Her usual warm banter with her musicians was replaced by quiet, focused preparation. She understood, perhaps better than anyone, that she might have to carry the entire performance herself. But Marvin couldn't run through anything. He couldn't remember the lyrics to songs he had been singing for decades. He kept asking the same questions over and over, unable to retain the answers. His voice, when he tried to vocalize, was raspy and weak, a shadow of the instrument that had once been capable of such power and nuance. Aretha watched this deterioration with a mixture of sadness and professional frustration. She had agreed to this performance expecting to celebrate the legacy of Detroit's soul music. Instead, she was witnessing the real-time disintegration of one of its most important voices. But the show had to go on. The audience was waiting, the charity needed the money, and backing out at the last minute would have been unprofessional. The moment they walked onto the stage together, the contrast was devastating. Aretha carried herself with dignity and confidence, every movement purposeful and controlled. Marvin shuffled beside her, looking like he wasn't sure why he was there or what he was supposed to do. When the music started, Aretha's voice filled the hall with its usual power and conviction. But when Marvin's turn came, the sound that emerged was barely recognizable. He was off-key, off-rhythm, and off-message. The lyrics came out garbled, sometimes trailing off mid-sentence, as if he had forgotten what he was trying to say. At one point, he stopped singing entirely and just stood there, swaying slightly, staring at something in the audience that no one else could see. Aretha had to carry the entire song herself, her voice compensating for his absence, while maintaining the facade that this was a planned duet. The audience's reaction was initially polite confusion, then uncomfortable silence, and finally a kind of mortified fascination. They were watching one of their heroes self-destruct in real time, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. Some people looked away, unable to bear witness to such public humiliation. Others stared transfixed, perhaps recognizing that they were seeing something historic, even if it was historic for all the wrong reasons. Aretha tried to salvage the performance, stepping closer to Marvin, attempting to guide him through the song with subtle cues and supportive harmonies. But nothing worked. Marvin was too far gone, too lost in his own internal chaos to connect with the music or the moment. When they attempted their second song, Ain't No Mountain High Enough, a tribute to Marvin's duets with Tammy Terrell, the irony was almost unbearable. Here was a song about two people supporting each other through any obstacle, being performed by a man who was drowning while standing next to someone trying desperately to throw him a lifeline. Halfway through the second song, Marvin simply stopped singing. He stood there for several long seconds, his mouth moving silently, his eyes unfocused and distant. Then, without warning, he turned and walked off the stage, leaving Aretha alone at the microphone to finish the song by herself. The audience didn't know how to react. Some applauded politely, trying to pretend that what they had witnessed was normal. Others sat in stunned silence, processing the tragedy they had just observed. Aretha finished the song with as much grace as she could muster, but her voice carried a weight that hadn't been there before. She knew she had just witnessed something that would change how she thought about fame, talent, and the price of artistic success. Backstage, Marvin was nowhere to be found. He had left the building immediately after walking off stage, disappearing into the Detroit night without saying goodbye to anyone, without offering explanations or apologies. His behavior was so erratic that some people initially worried he might have had a medical emergency. But those who knew about his drug use understood that this was just another manifestation of his accelerating decline. Aretha, still in her performance dress, sat alone in her dressing room for a long time after the show ended. People who tried to approach her with condolences or explanations were politely turned away. She didn't want to discuss what had happened, didn't want to analyze it or contextualize it. She just wanted to process the sadness of seeing someone she had respected reduced to such a state. In the days following the Cobo Hall disaster, word spread quickly through the music industry about Marvin's condition. Some people expressed sympathy, others judgment, but everyone agreed that something had to be done. Interventions were planned and abandoned. Family members and friends reached out, only to be rebuffed by Marvin's increasing paranoia and isolation. The recording industry, which had once celebrated Marvin as a revolutionary artist, now whispered about him in boardrooms and green rooms. Executives who had courted him for decades suddenly became unavailable when his name came up in conversations about future projects. The transformation from respected artist to industry liability happened with breathtaking speed, and Marvin was aware of every slight, every canceled meeting, every unreturned phone call. What made the situation more tragic was that Marvin still had moments of clarity, brief periods when the fog lifted, and he could see exactly what he was losing. During these intervals, he would call friends and colleagues, trying to explain, trying to apologize, trying to convince them that he was getting better. But the calls themselves often provided evidence of his continuing deterioration, as coherent thoughts would give way to paranoid rambling or sudden accusations against people who were trying to help him. The music press began to take notice as well. Articles appeared questioning whether Marvin's best days were behind him, whether he had become another casualty of the pressures that destroyed so many talented artists. The coverage was generally respectful, focusing on his past achievements rather than his current struggles, but Marvin interpreted every mention as evidence of a conspiracy against him. For Marvin, the humiliation of that night became another weight in an already unbearable load. He had disrespected Aretha Franklin, disappointed his fans, and confirmed every doubt he had ever harbored about his own worthiness. The shame consumed him, driving him deeper into the cocaine addiction that had caused the problem in the first place. Aretha never spoke publicly about that night at Cobo Hall. In interviews over the years, when asked about her relationship with Marvin Gaye, she would mention their mutual respect and shared Detroit heritage, but she never referenced their final performance together. It was as if she had made a conscious decision to remember him as he had been in his prime, rather than as he was in his decline. This silence was both merciful and devastating. Merciful because it protected Marvin's legacy from further damage, and devastating because it meant that one of the few people who had witnessed his complete breakdown chose not to intervene or speak out about the severity of his condition. Whether this was the right choice is impossible to know, but it was consistent with Aretha's lifelong practice of maintaining dignity and discretion in all professional relationships. For the remaining years of Marvin's life, the memory of that night haunted him. He would reference it obliquely in conversations with friends, asking if they thought Aretha still respected him, wondering if he had permanently damaged his reputation with someone whose opinion mattered so much to him. The answer, of course, was complicated. Aretha's silence suggested both disappointment and compassion, but Marvin interpreted it only as evidence of his own irredeemable failure. In his more lucid moments, Marvin would replay the entire evening in his mind, searching for the exact moment when everything went wrong. Was it when he first walked onto the stage? When he forgot the first lyrics? The analysis provided no answers, only shame. The tragic irony is that Aretha's discretion, intended to protect Marvin's dignity, may have contributed to his sense of isolation. If she had spoken out, if she had publicly acknowledged his struggle and called for help, it might have forced the interventions that could have saved his life. But she chose privacy over publicity, respect over rescue, and Marvin continued his downward spiral toward the inevitable conclusion. When Marvin was shot by his father on April 1st, 1984, Aretha was among the artists who issued statements about the loss of a musical genius. Her words were carefully chosen and appropriately respectful. But those who knew about the Cobo Hall incident could hear the subtext. She was mourning not just the man who died, but the man who had been dying for years, the artist who had been lost long before the bullet ended his physical existence. Today, when people discuss the great duets and collaborations in soul music history, Aretha and Marvin's final performance is never mentioned. It exists in the memories of those who witnessed it and in the silences of those who chose not to speak about it. It serves as a reminder that not all musical moments are worth preserving, that sometimes the most profound performances are the ones that reveal too much truth about the human cost of artistic greatness. The stage where they performed that night has hosted countless other events, other voices, other moments of triumph and disappointment. But for those who were there, who saw two legends share the spotlight one last time, the memory remains unchanged. Aretha's voice, strong and steady, carrying both the music and the burden of witnessing someone's final public breakdown. And Marvin's silence, both during the performance and in all the years that followed, speaking louder than any song he ever sang,